Have you ever experienced something so terrifying that you literally wet yourself? That's what happened to me when we went to a lake resort in northern Michigan. That lake house was the only one I knew that was located right next to an old cemetery, and because of that, I experienced things that nearly drove me insane. Good afternoon to everyone listening. My name is Ryan, or just Rye for short. I'm here today to share with you my story about the lake resort my family and I visited years ago. I was just a freshman in high school back then, and my mum had just returned from working overseas in London. My birthday was coming up soon, so as a celebration, our family decided to take a vacation. My older brother Jake was the one who suggested we go to this lake resort in northern Michigan. He said he'd been there before with some of his college friends, and that it was a great place. We all agreed to go. Jake and Dad handled the reservation, while my sister Emma and Mom prepared the food and other things we'd need to bring. 3 days before my birthday, we headed to the resort. I was so excited because it had been ages since I'd last gone swimming. We got there pretty quickly since it wasn't too far from home, though the entrance road to the resort was quite long. But when I finally saw it, I knew the money we spent was totally worth it. The place was huge with multiple pools of different depths. I wanted to jump in right away, but we had to unpack our stuff in the cabin first. How much longer, Mum? I want to swim. Can I go ahead? Mom just shook her head and pointed at my stuff that I'd just thrown on my bed. I had no choice but to put everything away before changing into my swimsuit. It only took a few minutes, but it felt like an hour because I was so impatient. When I heard Mom give the okay, I rushed out of the room. I could hear Jake calling after me. We'd agreed he'd watch over me at the pool. Our cabin was on the second floor, so I had to go down the stairs. Once outside, I headed to the changing room before going straight to the middle pool, which was just the right depth for me. I knew how to swim well enough, so I had no problem even going to the deepest parts. There were some kids around my age playing with a beach ball. They invited me to join them, so I quickly jumped in. Water splashed everywhere as I was gradually embraced by the coolness. I was having so much fun playing with these kids I didn't even know, but we acted like old friends. I spotted Jake in another pool, watching me. Once he was sure I was okay, he started swimming himself. My attention returned to our game when someone threw the ball in my direction. I caught it right away. Immediately, whoever was it came toward me to get the ball, so before they could grab it, I looked for someone to pass it to. I heard a voice beside me saying to pass it to him, so I quickly turned and threw the ball in that direction. I gasped when the ball hit the edge of the pool. There was no one there at all. The other kids laughed at me, asking what I was thinking, throwing it there. I gave them a fake laugh while wondering where that voice had come from. I became it after that, and even though I wanted to keep enjoying the game, my mind kept drifting back to the voice I'd heard. Was it just my imagination? Or maybe it came from someone else, and I just thought it was meant for me. It was around noon when we finished playing. The heat was really getting to me, so I went to our covered area to rest for a bit. I grabbed some food and lay down on one of the chairs there. I was eating quietly when I felt someone's presence beside me, sitting down on the concrete. I looked over and almost choked on the juice I was drinking because of how close this guy's face was to mine. His whole body was wet, like he'd just gotten out of the water. I couldn't help but notice the large scar on his cheek that extended all the way to his ear. He suddenly smiled at me before speaking. "Hey, how are you? Having a good stay here? We had fun playing earlier, didn't we?" Yeah. It was really fun. Haha. I felt awkward and sat up on the lounge chair to get some distance from him. I tried to remember his face from the kids I'd played with earlier, but I couldn't recall anyone like him. I wanted to ask, but I was afraid I might offend him, so I just pretended to nod, as if I remembered him being there. There were a lot of us, so maybe I just didn't notice him. He seemed pleased with my response and suddenly sat down right next to me. At that moment, I wanted to push him away because I didn't like how he was, acting. He hadn't even introduced himself, so it was weird how he was acting like we were close friends. At that point, it was like he read my mind and suddenly introduced himself. "I'm George, by the way. You're Ryan, right? Hehe. I heard them say your name earlier." George pointed toward my brother, who was busy showing off to some girls nearby. I didn't know what to say to him, so I just nodded and forced a laugh. I quickly finished my juice so I could get back to the pool and leave George behind. But then I thought that if I left our area, he might do something to our stuff. My family was all busy swimming, so I had no choice but to stay there. To get rid of the awkwardness and make him stop staring at me, I offered him some food. He accepted the sandwich I gave him, and we ate together. At least he stopped talking and focused on eating, but that didn't last long. Once he finished, he suddenly stood up and invited me to play again. "We're going to play again like before. Do you want to join us? Let's play again." Part of me was hesitant, but when I thought about how much fun we'd had earlier, I was tempted to join. There was nothing wrong with playing again, even if George was there. Besides, maybe I just had the wrong impression of him, and he'd seem less weird when I saw him play. So I agreed. I stood up and was about to head to the pool when he suddenly grabbed my arm. I almost jumped because his palm felt like ice, like it burned from the cold. He pointed in a different direction and said, "We'd be playing over there. Behind. The lodge. Is there a pool back there? I thought this was the only one." "It's even bigger than this one. Come on, Ryan. The others are already waiting there." He started walking away, so I had no choice but to follow him. We kept getting farther and farther from everyone else. I was just quietly following when my eyes caught sight of the other kids I'd played with earlier. They were at their cabana, holding the ball. I stopped walking and called out to George, who was ahead of me. "George, they're still here. Come back," I shouted at him. But he didn't stop walking and kept going farther away. I jogged after him to catch up. I was about to call him again when someone grabbed my shoulder, followed by someone yelling, "Hey!" right in my ear. I yelped in surprise and annoyance as I turned to see who did that to me. My brother Jake's frowning face appeared before me, staring at me. "What the heck, Jake? Are you trying to scare me? Why are you yelling when you could just call me normally?" I got a smack on the back of my head because he said he'd been calling me for a while, but I wasn't listening. Where was I going anyway? I was getting too far from the resort. If something happened to me, he'd be the one Mum would blame, so I shouldn't wander off without telling him. I told him I was going to a pool in the back to swim. "I'm not alone, Jake. George is with me. We're going to play there." I looked back in George's direction, but all I saw was a narrow path. It looked like he'd left me. I was about to keep walking, but Jake stopped me for the second time. He asked what I was talking about. "There's no pool back there. That path isn't even part of the resort anymore. If I kept going, I wouldn't find a swimming pool, but a cemetery instead." Jake got my attention after mentioning that word. It had never occurred to me that this resort would be next to a cemetery. Jake explained that the cemetery had been there long before the resort was built, so there was no way there'd be a pool back there. Jake invited me to go back, so I followed him. I looked back one last time to find George, but I couldn't see him anymore. Had he lied to me, or was he just messing with me? I figured that must be it, especially since the guy was kind of weird. Evening came, and Jake and I were playing mobile games in the cabin. Mom, Dad, and Emma had already gone to sleep, exhausted from swimming earlier. It was 10 p.m. when we decided to stop and go to sleep too. But I wasn't sleepy yet, so I kept playing by myself. I was lying on my stomach with a blanket over me. The whole room was quiet except for the sound of the AC and the sound effects from the game I was playing. But before long, I heard footsteps to my right. The sound of feet on the tiles sounded wet, like someone had just gotten out of the water. No one had gotten up to shower, so I frowned, wondering who it was. I looked to my right when I felt a sudden gust of cold wind. I immediately moved away when a face appeared right in front of mine. I let out a scream when I looked into his red, crying eyes. His lips and cheeks were as pale as garlic, and a few strands of wet hair clung to his forehead. Since Jake was lying next to me, I accidentally hit his side with my sudden movement, and he almost fell off the bed. He woke up because of the commotion I caused, and immediately pushed me away before yelling at me. Why was I making so much noise in the middle of the night? Emma and Mom woke up too because of us. But I didn't think about that and kept tapping Jake while keeping my eyes closed. "There's a ghost, Jake! There's a ghost in the room! Over there!" I immediately pointed next to me, my lips and hands trembling. My heart was pounding like it was going crazy from the rising panic. I waited for Jake to react, but all I got was another smack on the head. He pushed me again and said he didn't see anything. My eyes opened at that, and he was right. There was no ghost there. The disturbing face I'd seen just moments ago was gone. Confused, I slowly moved away from Jake and looked around the room. I still couldn't relax, so I turned on the light. Emma got annoyed because the light was too bright. I wanted to protest, but I couldn't do anything since all three of them were against keeping the light on. They tried to convince me that what I saw wasn't real, but I still couldn't calm down. I'm not usually easily scared, but that was the first time I'd experienced something like that, so I couldn't get it out of my mind right away. I couldn't explain whether it was real or just my imagination, because the face was so vivid. Even when I closed my eyes, I could still see the tears streaming from those red eyes. I stopped playing after that. The room fell silent again as I prayed in my mind that I wouldn't see anything like that again. My prayer was answered, but I was given a different experience. Instead, my whole body was covered with the blanket, so it was strange that my skin could still feel the wind on my feet. Before long, a wet hand brushed against them, as if teasing me. I covered my mouth to keep from making noise and quickly curled up my body. Jake was on my left, so my right side was empty. There was no pillow there, but I felt something heavy pressing against me. I couldn't see what it was because of the blanket, and I had no plans to look because I was afraid something terrifying would appear before me. I poked Jake several times to wake him up. "Jake, wake up. Someone's lying next to us. Please wake up," I whispered to him with urgency. Sweat had formed on my forehead and back from anxiety, and also because I was getting too hot under the blanket. As much as I wanted to remove it, I couldn't because of fear. Instead of helping me, Jake just elbowed me, a sign that he didn't want to be disturbed in his sleep. I was left alone and awake that night. I squeezed my eyes shut and forced myself to sleep despite my restless heart. I don't know what time it was, but somehow I managed to fall asleep. I woke up because Emma was gently tapping my cheek. I was the only one still sleeping, and everyone else was getting ready for the outing we'd planned for that day. I just nodded in response and got up heavily from the bed. Emma noticed how pale I looked and asked if something was wrong. I was the one who'd been so excited about this trip, so why did I seem so down now? "Ah, it's nothing, Emma. I just didn't sleep well." "Didn't you notice anything when you woke up this morning? Wasn't there anyone else lying next to Jake?" Emma frowned at my question, thinking about what I'd asked. Then she shook her head. She said it was just Jake and me sleeping. It would be impossible for anyone else to lie down with us because no one else had entered our room last night. The door was locked, so no one could have gotten in even if they'd tried. I nodded in response and didn't ask anymore because I knew they wouldn't believe me anyway. If I told them I felt someone lying next to me last night besides Jake. I was about to get out of bed when Emma added something. "There was a guy around my age looking for me earlier. I was still asleep, so he just left." "Who was it? Why was he looking for me? Did he need something from me?" I thought about the people my age I'd talked to yesterday, and the only ones who came to mind were the kids I'd played ball with at the pool. And George. I don't know why, but goosebumps suddenly rose on my arms when I remembered his name. I quickly rubbed my arms to get rid of the creepy feeling. Emma said the guy didn't mention his name, but I'd played with him yesterday. I nodded and was completely convinced that maybe it was one of the kids who came here to invite me to play again. I got ready for our day trip. After we all ate, we left the lodge to explore outside the resort. I was lagging behind because I'd stopped to buy a drink. I was about to catch up when a kid came running toward me. I froze when I recognized who it was. George. His whole body was soaking wet, just like yesterday, as if he'd just gotten out of the water. The shorts he was wearing were the same as yesterday, making me wonder if he'd even changed clothes or if he just wore the same shorts again to save on laundry. "Ryan, why did you leave me yesterday? Didn't I say we were going to play? Why did you leave me? Didn't I say we were going to play?" I frowned as he kept repeating the question. I didn't answer right away because I was disturbed by the look he was giving me. His eyebrows were furrowed as if he was angry at me, but his lips remained smiling. It was the same contradictory expression he'd had earlier when I left him. When he took a step closer to me, I immediately stepped back. My knees went weak from fear, and I completely fell to the ground. My shorts got wet from the damp pavement. "Why are you bothering me? Leave me alone. Stop following me. I don't like you." I just covered my eyes to avoid seeing his face getting closer to mine. I started crying and was ready to scream for help, but a voice entered my ears. Following that were warm hands on my shoulders, shaking me hard. My eyes opened, and Jake's worried face appeared before me. I was back in bed and lying down, but I could still feel my wet shorts. Jake immediately shook his head and said I'd been having nightmares. He pointed at our wet blanket that got soaked because of my wet shorts. "How scary was your dream that you wet yourself?" When I realized what happened, that it was just a dream, embarrassment immediately rose to my face. I quickly got out of bed and changed. While changing, I kept glancing at the bathroom because the dream was still so clear in my mind. The pale feet I saw, and George's face refused to leave my thoughts. I got back in bed after Jake removed the wet bedsheet. I didn't know how I'd fall asleep again when anxiety had completely taken over my feelings. At that moment, Jake nudged me, so I looked at him. That's when I noticed his face was also troubled, hesitating whether to tell me something or not. But eventually, he told me about something that happened before I woke up. His voice was soft, as if afraid someone else might hear us. He said that before I woke up earlier, he heard a voice crying from the bathroom in our room. He wanted to check it out, but fear stopped him because of the things I'd told him. I immediately sat up, shocked as I looked at him. I hadn't expected that my brother would also be bothered by whatever ghost was haunting us, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't breathe a sigh of relief. At least my feelings were somewhat lightened because I had someone with me in this ordeal. I wasn't the only one feeling this way, but my brother too. Honestly, I don't know if I can last another night here. What if we tell Mum we should just go home tomorrow? We've all had fun anyway. As much as Jake wanted to agree with my suggestion, it was unlikely Mum would approve since tomorrow was my birthday. I'd definitely get scolded if we suddenly told them we wanted to go home. Jake and I decided to just endure these strange occurrences one last time until we could go home. The next morning, I was like a walking zombie because of how exhausted I looked. Even Mum noticed the change in my demeanor. This wasn't like me at all. I was always excited about my birthday, so it was strange that I seemed so down. How could I be happy when my mind was so disturbed by everything that had happened? Besides, I hadn't slept well because I was afraid something might make itself known or appear in my dreams again. Even so, I didn't want them to worry about me, so I forced myself to smile and act like nothing was wrong. We ate at the lodge's restaurant, where Mum had also ordered a cake. I managed to enjoy myself somewhat, and the thoughts in my head disappeared for a while. After the celebration ended, I decided to go outside the lodge and watch people swimming in the pool. Hands suddenly landed on my shoulders, making me jump. The guy who'd grabbed me was startled too, so I quickly apologized. "Sorry, I thought you were someone else. You scared me." "Oh, it's just you." It was one of the kids I'd played ball with the other day, Tommy. He nodded, accepting my apology, before inviting me to play again later. They wanted me to join them. I didn't answer right away, worried that I might see George again. I scratched my head and asked in a soft voice who would be joining us later. Who's all going to be there?" Is George going to be there too? Not that I'm being picky. I just want to know. He frowned because they didn't have anyone named George who played with them. That confused me and raised my suspicions even more. That George was definitely weird. Really? Someone approached me the other day saying how much fun he had playing with us. He even invited me to play again over there. I pointed toward the back of the lodge. He thought about what I said, and after a moment, he suddenly gasped as if he'd realized something. Maybe the George I talked to was the kid everyone talks about at this resort. My expression filled with confusion, and I waited for him to explain. He said this wasn't his first time at this resort, so he knew some of the gossip going around. And there was one rumor that wouldn't die because victims had actually experienced being bothered by a boy named George. According to what he'd heard, George was a ghost who'd been appearing at the resort for a long time. People said the reason he stayed at the resort was because his grave was located close by. My brother's story about the cemetery next to the resort immediately came to mind. He liked to interact with people who came to celebrate birthdays. He didn't know why, but many people suspected that George might have died on his birthday. He always invited people he liked to play with him and would insist if they refused. He wouldn't hesitate to make himself known to the family members of the person he liked if he felt he wasn't getting the attention he wanted. That's when I realized he might also be bothering Jake because of how Jake had stopped me from going with him. Oh, I see. There's been something making itself known in our lodge room too. I don't know if it's George or not. He asked me what room number we had, so I told him. He slowly nodded, as if he hadn't expected my answer. He said that room had only been reopened last year because of a tragedy that happened several years ago. They said someone had died there and the body was found in the bathroom, completely pale. He didn't know the cause of death, but he knew the victim's family had complained to the resort, but nothing was done about it. That wasn't the last family to complain either, because someone also reported a drowning in the pool recently. He couldn't confirm if it was true or just a rumor with no truth to it. I nodded at what he said, not knowing what to say. Based on what I'd learned, things were starting to make sense. My suspicions were right. There really was something wrong with this resort. It's possible that George wasn't the only ghost bothering me. There might be many other spirits here that I just hadn't noticed. The guy I was with noticed my silence and immediately patted my shoulder. He said not to worry because the hauntings usually don't last long. They usually disappear once people leave the resort. I went back inside the lodge and found Mom. I asked her if we could please go home this afternoon instead of spending another night here. I expected them to give me strange looks, so even though I was hesitant, I told them how I was feeling. I couldn't stand to stay here another night after everything I'd learned. To be honest, I'm not feeling okay here anymore. I miss home and I want to go back. Maybe we can just continue my birthday celebration there. Jake was there listening and joined the conversation. He made an excuse that he also wanted to go home because his college instructor had texted about an urgent assignment they needed to complete that day. Because of what Jake said, they had no choice but to agree, especially since it concerned his studies. I breathed a sigh of relief when we went back to the room and started packing. I finished quickly and left first because I didn't want to stay in that room anymore. I felt like the air in there was heavy and suffocating. Went outside the lodge first and waited for Mom there. I was just watching people enjoying themselves and swimming when I suddenly remembered I'd agreed to play with them. I tried to find them to let them know I was leaving. I saw Tommy sitting by the pool, holding a ball. He looked like he was waiting for the others. I told him I couldn't join later because we were going home. He nodded in response and lightly tapped my arm. I don't know if it was just my imagination or because his body was wet, but his palm felt ice cold when it touched my arm. When I saw my family coming out, I didn't think about it anymore and immediately went toward them. Didn't even try to look back at the resort because all I wanted at that point was to finally leave that place. I fell asleep during the entire drive, and when I woke up, we'd arrived back home. I felt revitalized when I saw my room. We'd only been gone a few days, but because of what happened, It felt like we'd been away for a week. I was planning to rest when Jake suddenly came into my room and sat on my bed next to me. He suddenly poked my side before asking me why I went to the pool earlier before we left. I was just saying goodbye to the kid I played with. I said I'd join their game, but we were leaving, so that's why. Why, Jake? Didn't you see him? Jake raised his eyebrow and shook his head. He said he didn't see anyone I was talking to. I was just standing there alone. Because of that, I felt like cold water had been poured over me as I remembered the feeling of him tapping me earlier. I immediately became worried. But Jake stopped me and said I shouldn't think about it anymore. The important thing was that we were home now. Since then, I haven't experienced any more hauntings or ghost sightings around me. It seems Tommy was right. The harassment from George only stayed at the resort. I never went back to that resort again, and whenever we plan outings, Jake never recommends it anymore. Several years have passed since then, and I'm not scared anymore when I think about that experience. The only thing I can't get out of my mind is the mystery of what Jake said. To this day, I still don't know if what he said was true. That I had no one with me that day. That's the end of my story. Thank you for listening. Good afternoon, and to all the listeners, our town is located in upstate New York. This experience happened during our school cleanup day back in 2009. My oldest daughter Sarah was only going into second grade at that time. We needed to clean the school to prepare for the upcoming school year. This was also for our kids who would be using the classrooms. I won't mention which school this was for their security. Behind that school was an overgrown wooded area. There were large oak trees growing there. No one went to that area because, according to rumors, children who went there would encounter strange beings they couldn't see. The kids who wandered there would always get sick, so the teachers constantly warned and reminded us parents to tell our children not to go there. They told us to instruct our kids not to let them wander to that area. According to stories from those who'd experienced it, something strange lived there. It was big and muscular, but its face was supposedly on its chest. They called it the Elephant Man because its face supposedly resembled an elephant's. It liked children, which is why kids were the ones who would see it. We'd never seen it ourselves. But because I didn't want my daughter to experience this, I kept warning her not to play in the back area of the school. Tuesday was the day assigned to us for cleaning the classroom and schoolyard. I brought my daughter along because there was no one to watch her at home. Fortunately, other parents also brought their kids, so my daughter had someone to play with. We were in the middle of waxing the floor when the children came running breathlessly into the classroom, saying something had happened to my daughter. She'd apparently gone to the back of the school. Then they saw her suddenly collapse. I rushed to where my daughter was. They came with me to the back of the school to show me exactly where Sarah had gone. I was so worried then because I knew that place was dangerous, and I wondered why she went there. I knew she knew how to follow instructions, but she still went there. I was a bit annoyed with her. When we got to the area, I saw Sarah lying on the ground next to a large oak tree. I immediately picked her up and tried to wake her, but she wouldn't wake up. I was so confused and panicked, I didn't know what to do. My mind went blank when I felt something strange in the place. There was a cold breeze mixed with the normal wind. My hair stood on end. Felt like there was another being in the area watching us. I quickly looked around but didn't see anything. But I heard someone laughing. The voice was deep, like a large man. But the voice wasn't frightening. It felt light, like you'd just want to chat with them, like you'd forget all your problems. I snapped out of that state of mind when one of the parents with me shook my shoulder. That's when I came back to reality. They told me to take my daughter to the hospital right away, and I did just that. I hired a taxi even though they charged a lot. I breathed easier when the doctor said my daughter was fine after examining her. Her test results were normal. Maybe she was just tired, and that's why she fainted. Maybe she was also hungry. That's when I realized Sarah hadn't eaten properly before we left home. She said she didn't like the food. The doctor also told me that once my daughter woke up, I could take her home. I waited for Sarah to wake up before asking her what happened. She said someone had called her to the oak tree. He was giving her ripe fruit. The man who called her was nice. She wanted to eat the fruit, so she approached him to take what he was offering, but she felt sleepy. I was even more shocked by my daughter's next story after she took the fruit. When she woke up, she'd been transported to a place with many oak trees. The trees were short and she could reach the fruit. There was so much fruit that she was overjoyed. She ate there because she was hungry. She felt the fruit tasted absolutely delicious. The man even talked to her, saying they should play before she went home. That's when she realized she wasn't at school anymore, so she insisted on going home. But the man who brought her there seemed sad. It was like he didn't want to let her leave. But she fell asleep again when she heard my voice calling her, and when she woke up, she was at the hospital. That's why she was confused about how she ended up at the hospital. She'd only fallen asleep. I was so scared for my daughter because I thought the thing living in the oak tree really intended to take her. So I warned my daughter never to accept anything given to her by anyone she didn't know. She nodded at what I said because she was scared too. That evening when we were home, Sarah developed a high fever. Her fever was so high that her whole body was shaking. I kept wiping her down with a towel dampened in lukewarm water. I wanted to take her back to the hospital, but there was no more public transport at night in our area. So I just took care of her and watched over her. I fed her and gave her medicine. I was still wondering why she got a fever right when we got home. That made me even more afraid. It was 3 a.m. when her fever finally went down a bit, so I was able to doze off too. Dreamed I was in the woods. I was just standing there watching Sarah walk toward the oak tree. Soon she was calling me and asking for help. But when I walked closer to her, she moved farther away from me. She wasn't walking, but she was getting farther away. It was like something was pulling us apart. No matter how much I ran toward her, she just got farther and farther away, until I got tired. But I could still hear Sarah's crying and begging for me to save her. I woke up crying because I thought it was real. Thank goodness it was just a dream. I saw my daughter sleeping in her bed. I checked if she still had a fever. Her fever had really gone down, so my anxiety disappeared. My mother-in-law came to the house the next morning. She was just our neighbor. She always came in the morning to bring breakfast for my daughter. She knew Sarah was picky about food. She was selective about what she'd eat, but when her grandmother gave it to her, she'd eat it. When she learned Sarah had just recovered from a fever, she was more worried than I was. She immediately came with me to watch over Sarah. She went straight to the bedroom to feed my daughter, but as soon as she entered the room, she froze. She called me and we went to the kitchen. That's where she talked to me. She asked me who the man with a wide face like an elephant was in my daughter's room. Why did we have a visitor like that? Where did he come from? I got chills at what my mother-in-law said. I told her we had no one with us, just Sarah and me at home. My husband only came home on weekends from work. Because of the confusion, we went back to the room to see what she was talking about, because she insisted she'd seen a strange person in the room. When we entered the room, my mother-in-law said the man was gone. Maybe he'd left. But I was confused because if he left, I would have heard his footsteps since our house had wooden floors. I suddenly remembered the talk about the creature at the school. Its appearance matched the description given by those who'd seen it. When my mother-in-law found out Sarah had gone to the back of the school, she immediately told me to take my daughter to a folk healer. Maybe Sarah had been touched by something. My mother-in-law also knew the story about the overgrown area at that school. I was the only one who didn't know, because I wasn't originally from there. Even though I'd heard the story of the elephant man, I didn't pay much attention to it. I trusted that my daughter wouldn't experience what other children had, because Sarah knew how to follow instructions. She was mature in her thinking. My mother-in-law accompanied me to see a folk healer she knew. I woke Sarah up to tell her we were leaving. I tried several times to wake her, but she wouldn't wake up. Immediately got nervous. I knew that wasn't normal because my daughter was easy to wake. I wanted to panic, but my mother-in-law stopped me. She said that wouldn't help. I was crying then, and she told me to get Sarah ready. I hurriedly moved. While I was getting her ready, my mother-in-law kept holding Sarah. She said my daughter was cold. Her coldness was strange. I got even more scared. We took Sarah to the folk healer my mother-in-law knew. When we got to the healer's house, I was surprised because the healer was quite young. She introduced herself as Andrea. She had another woman with her named Lily. I told them what happened to my daughter, and they didn't hesitate to help us. When they examined Sarah, they immediately told me that my daughter's soul wasn't in her body. They performed a ritual to find my daughter. They burned incense in the house while reciting prayers. Soon, Andrea said my daughter had been taken by a strange being. From her description, it matched the creature living behind the school. My daughter was in a place with many trees bearing different fruits. She was crying because she wanted to go home, but the guardian there wouldn't let her leave. We needed to fetch my daughter. I got even more scared. I had no idea I wasn't even with my daughter anymore. I thought she was just sleeping peacefully, didn't know something bad was already happening to her. It was 2 p.m. We rushed back to the school. We left my mother-in-law at the healer's house. Just the 3 of us, Andrea, Lily and I, went. Since there were still people doing cleanup work, we talked to a teacher. We asked permission to perform prayers at the back of the school. They knew the story of that place, so they agreed. They just asked us to try not to let others know what we were doing to avoid any scandal. When we reached the wooded area behind the school, I could feel the heavy atmosphere in the place. I also felt like the oak tree was very far away, even though it was only a few meters from the entrance. As we got closer, I noticed something strange about the oak tree. It had more dried leaves than before. The branches we stepped on seemed to echo around us. I didn't know what was happening, but I just followed Andrea and Lily, who were walking ahead. We'd been walking for quite a while, but we noticed it was taking us a long time to reach the oak tree. I heard Andrea say the creature was moving the oak tree farther away. It really wanted to take my daughter. Started crying again and begging the creature who took my daughter to please return her. Lily calmed me down and said they'd do everything to save Sarah. Soon, she took out the necklace she was wearing. It had a key pendant. I heard Andrea say they'd use it because that was the only way to catch the creature. I could see the apprehension on Andrea's face. She kept looking at Lily, and I heard her asking if Lily was ready to do this. Lily nodded. After that, we quietly continued walking. I didn't understand what they were talking about, but I just trusted what they could do. Soon, we stopped walking. They both closed their eyes, and Andrea began reciting prayers. I couldn't understand the language she was praying in, but I could feel its power. The surroundings became cold, and I felt peace while hearing that prayer. I saw Lily spinning the key in front of her. It was like she was pointing it at what she was looking for. When she turned it to the left, I heard Sarah crying. My daughter was screaming and screaming. She was asking for help. Sarah was so scared. She was calling me repeatedly. I started crying and collapsed to the ground, feeling sorry for my daughter, but I didn't know how to help her. Soon, I heard Lily calling Sarah. She was inviting my daughter to come with her. Lily told us she could see the creature living in the oak tree always following my daughter, wherever my daughter went. The terrifying creature was behind her. I couldn't see anything around us. It was just the 3 of us in the area. Lily was standing with her eyes closed, and Andrea kept praying until I felt a force like something was pulling us closer to the oak tree. Andrea's voice grew louder and louder, as if she was fighting with someone. I heard Lily gasp as if in pain. I saw something pulling her foot because it was moving, but she was trying to resist. She was struggling with her foot. Andrea helped her. Andrea had a staff and struck it on the ground near Lily's foot. Then, Lily was okay. I really can't explain how Andrea could see what was happening to Lily when her eyes were closed. It was like she could see even with her eyes closed, or maybe she just had a really strong sixth sense. I pinched my arm to make sure I wasn't dreaming. It hurt, so that meant what I was witnessing was real. Soon we were both being pulled closer to the oak tree. We couldn't stop it until we were really close to the tree. In an instant, Andrea was holding the oak tree's trunk. Lily walked around the tree while holding up her necklace. I suddenly felt the pulling force disappear. Everything became normal in just a moment. After Andrea finished praying, she talked to me and said they'd fetched Sarah. I asked where my daughter was. They said she was back in her body. We immediately returned to the healer's house. I was overjoyed when I saw my daughter sitting up and talking to her grandmother. My mother-in-law greeted me as I entered the healer's house. Sarah had woken up as if she'd just been sleeping, and nothing else had happened. She woke up quickly and wondered how she ended up at the hospital. She'd only fallen asleep. Immediately went to my daughter and hugged her tightly. I thanked Andrea and Lily. I tried to give them some money, but they refused. They said what they did was truly charitable work, and they didn't charge for it. After that, we went home. My mother-in-law and I talked. I said I'd bring some fruit to those two women who helped us, but my mother-in-law said not to bother. They'd surely be leaving soon anyway. Those two always left after helping someone, like they were vacationing in another place, then would come back later. They always did that. It made me wonder what they did, like they were cleansing themselves after dealing with spirits, resting before going home. After everything that happened to my daughter, I finally believed the story. About the elephant man creature living in the oak tree at Sarah's school. They said it really liked children. When it liked a child, it would offer them fruit. If the child accepted it, it would invite them to come along. Then it wouldn't return them. It would take the child's soul and imprison it in that tree. If we hadn't acted quickly with Sarah, she might not be with us anymore. They said the way to counter that creature was garlic. It was afraid of the smell of garlic, so I always sent Sarah to school with garlic in her skirt pocket. My daughter finished elementary school with me, always putting garlic in her pocket. There's nothing wrong with believing in folk wisdom. If it doesn't harm others, that's the end of my story. Over the years, my daughter doesn't remember what happened to her. She just laughs at me now when I tell the story. But she knows there was always garlic in her skirt pocket. She said she wondered why there was garlic there. I didn't know she was throwing the garlic away when she felt it in her pocket. She was a mischievous child, but it's okay because she finished elementary school without being visited by the elephant man again. Thank you very much for listening. God bless you all.